Paul Murray, let's bring you in. You've been watching, no doubt, the developments over the last several hours. What do you reckon?
Been fascinating stuff. Congratulations to you guys for the live coverage. Literally watching MPs rallying other MPs, including Tony Burke, was fascinating to see on the air. But I suppose the question a lot of people are thinking now is, are we watching history in the making or the beginning of it, or is it a train crash live on TV? The numbers, as you say, that will come back and forth, but it seems very much to me that it was almost laughable at times when Kevin Rudd today was putting himself out there as if he was the victim. I couldn't help but think that it was the bully who was now pretending to be the victim. The weakness that's been the leadership of Julia Gillard that's brought us even to a slight door being open for this moment exists when the Prime Minister, and we had a live shot on her for hours and hours and hours, the door we thought she was going to walk out of in Adelaide. Instead, all that we get is a statement that honestly is just barely longer than a tweet. It's quite surprising to me that the Prime Minister didn't get in front of a camera and say something, because the only tape that's going to be shown over and over again this evening and again tomorrow morning is that of Kevin Rudd, and Kevin Rudd talking about faceless men. Well, this one is very different than what happened 18 months ago. Everyone knows where this has been coming from, and this isn't happening in the dead of the night. This one has been a solid 12 months in the making. We'll return to David when there's more reaction among Labor MPs. I'll give him a few minutes to have a look into all of that. But joining me here at the desk very shortly will be my colleague John Stanley from TUE, but Joe Hildebrand from the Daily Telegraph. Hello, sir.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Very good, and a man who I'm sure would like to camp out for the next 4 or 5 days here on the set, Mark Latham, former Labor leader. Good evening to you.
G'day, Paul.
All right. Kevin Rudd, is he playing the all-or-nothing game now? What do you think? Why do you think he chose now as the moment?
Well, there's a few things that are clear. One of them is that Rudd can't be too confident about his numbers, because the normal practice would be to resign and challenge in the one motion. You look at Rudd's form guide for these Labor leadership contests. Put his hand up in 2003, had 8 or 9 votes and dropped out. Put his hand up in 2005 when I left, had about a dozen votes and dropped out. He won the leadership in 2006 off the back of Gillard's numbers, his running mate. He probably still only had a dozen, not a big amount. And in 2010, as a sitting Prime Minister, he faced the humiliation of not even contesting a caucus ballot, knowing he'd be heavily defeated. It was said he only had 20 votes at the time, even though he'd been a winning Labor Prime Minister. So, you know, if you're at the racetrack and you're looking at that form guide, you wouldn't be putting any money on this bludger getting the 40 votes he needs to be a credible challenger if, in fact, he contests the ballot next week. So I think that's clear. Rudd would not be having a lot of confidence in his form or his position, because normally, and you can imagine a Keating or the like resigning and challenging at the one motion and getting on with the job. He's coming back to consult with the family. Well, that's the weakest excuse you've ever heard in politics. The family know exactly where he's at. And to talk to his colleagues, well, he knows where most of them are at as well. So that's lame. The other two things I'd say are self-evident from my perspective. One is that Gillard can count and Rudd can't. I've seen them at close quarters. Gillard is an effective numbers person. And the last point I'd make is that Gillard is very good in the persuasion stakes, face-to-face. These ballots aren't contested through the media. In fact, sometimes the candidate who does the most media gets the least number of votes. It's face-to-face and telephone lobbying with the colleagues. Gillard there, as he showed, getting the better of Abbott after the last election, is quite skilled in the persuasion part of politics, not so good in the broader arena, but face-to-face she's quite good. Whereas Rudd is hopeless. You know, Rudd is just useless. He gets into these conversations and just talks about himself forever and pees people off. So Gillard has got all the advantages running her way, and I'd be shocked, absolutely stunned, if Rudd could get over that threshold of 40 votes, if in fact he goes through with a challenge.
So here's the question that I know a lot of people have been asking for a little while, and it's probably the first time that it's made it to air now. Do you think that if Kevin Rudd lost that ballot coming up next week, does he go to the backbench and snipe away for the next 18 months, or does he pull the pin and tear down the government?
Well, what's been happening with Rudd this week? I think Rudd got himself in an awkward position where all that destabilisation and media work he's been doing behind the scenes, it sort of erupted a bit beyond his control. And it's been a real slanging match. It's been building up in the media. And if it's true that Rudd has not got the critical mass of 40 votes and it's something way below that, how does he get out of this situation? Well, he needs to do something dramatic. He's invented this alibi that, of all things, Gillard was disloyal to him. You'd have to believe in the Easter Bunny to swallow that one. And the Queensland election. That's not a bad little alibi, that he's doing this for the benefit of his great mate Anna Bligh. And if he finds out that his numbers are closer to 30 than 40, he mightn't go through, as per 2003, 2005, 2010. He mightn't actually contest the caucus ballot. So, having got into this inflated situation, he needed to do something dramatic and perhaps give himself the alibi of not even running next week to get himself from under the rock. And this might be what he's on about. The resignation looks like he's done something on principle. He can slink off to the backbench, say, it wasn't the right time to have a Labor ballot. Anna Bligh's interests have got to come first. The party needs stability. He'll just invent some fantasy story and slink off to the backbench and hope that something turns up. That's been a pattern in his behaviour in the past, just hoping that one morning 30 people in the caucus will wake up and think that he is the new Rudd, he's a changed man and all that garbage. So he's got various options there. For all my psychic insight into the man, if you had to ask me for putting a bet on what he does, I get the feeling he won't have the critical mass of caucus support and won't even run next week. That's my guess. And the resignation is a way of getting out of this predicament, put himself onto the backbench and hope that something turns up in the future.
Now, we'll keep the conversation going in a moment, but I wanted to bring into the conversation Chris Kenny, who is from the Australian newspaper. Now, Chris, when we spoke a few hours ago, literally in the minutes after the Kevin Rudd statement, you told me on the radio that you thought it was almost a stroke of genius the way that he delivered the message and was trying to basically win over the public as much as he was trying to win over the caucus.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a different interpretation of this from Mark Latham, understandably, I suppose. Although I think Mark is right. He's talking about a standard challenge in the Labor tradition where the way to get the numbers, of course, is to win over your personal colleagues by direct conversation with them and direct lobbying. Kevin Rudd can't do that. As Mark Latham knows, most of them can't stand him. They don't want him back. What he has to do is try and win them over by public support, if you like, to have the public help him convince the caucus to back him. So I think this is very good timing. He's taken the high moral ground by saying he's the innocent abroad working for Australia in Washington. Oh, it's terrible. Julia Gillard and others are not being loyal to him while he's trying to look after Australia's interests, so he has to resign. And now he's got a week to push this argument that if you stick with Julia Gillard, you're sticking with the factional heavyweights and the union heavies. If you want to change the Labor Party and rescue the government, you've got to come with me. And look, the polls will help him. A lot of the public talk on talkback radio and letters to the paper will help him. And he'll be hoping that this creates a bit of momentum to convince those waverers in the caucus that really he's their best option. There's just one other thing I'll chuck in there before we come back later, is that the other big thing that Kevin Rudd has in his favour is that if they put him in as leader, they know he will be the leader till the next election. If they stick with Julia Gillard, they know Kevin Rudd might be challenging again in 3 or 4 months. So if they want to end it on Tuesday, they could go with Kevin Rudd.
Well, Chris, I've got to say, mate, you've got absolutely no idea. For anyone to seriously get on national TV and say that letters to the editor influence caucus votes, mate, hand in your badge. Seriously, you've got no idea, buddy. You've got no idea.
Well, you tell me this, Mark. You tell me this, Mark. How did Kevin Rudd get the Labor leadership in the first place?
Was
it because his caucus colleague was? Did caucus love him, or did they think he might be an option for them because he'd built a big public profile?
He won a ballot against Kim Beazley. And to win a ballot, you need the caucus votes. What they're saying in the letter to the editor on Talkback Radio, the people who've got the votes in this ballot aren't listening to Talkback Radio, they're talking to each other. And I'd say in terms of how much they detest Kevin Rudd. But the idea that this is... I know everyone in the press gallery thinks they're very, very important people and they have a great deal of influence on how it works. But let me tell you...
Quite the opposite, Mark. I think that the media are into it at all.
Yeah, you are. You're saying the media will determine the outcome because Rudd is popular in the letters page, on Talkback Radio, the papers will publish some polls. Well, for people in the caucus, hard-headed, experienced political operators who've done all this on the ground, know the colleagues, and know the
hard-headed,
candidates.
experienced political operators who have got everyone to this situation so far.
Well, if you can just let me
Give
finish.
a break.
If you can just let me finish, Chris. You're speaking out of your own sense of self-importance instead of reality. The reality is that caucus people... Well, you can laugh, Chris. There are only 8 living Australians who've contested a Labor leadership ballot, and I happen to be one of them. You, my friend, will never get to contest anything. Because what you've said here tonight is just ludicrous. It's just not how it works, buddy.
Right.
Hand in your badge.
We've got a long hour. You can have round 2 in a second, Chris. But I want to get to Joe.
We'll come back.
Yeah, I want to get to Joe. I want to get to John. Joe Hildebrand, how do you read this at the moment? Do you think that the way Kevin Rudd announced this, 1 o'clock in the morning, 15 minutes of fairly open air time, that he was live across lots of TV channels, and he was the story at 6 o'clock tonight?
Yeah, no, it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, tactically it was masterful. Mark's right, he doesn't have the numbers. And Mark is also right when he says that Labor caucus have made a living out of spectacularly ignoring what the public actually want. and have got it to this point. That's
Exhibit A.
very popular for a while, mate.
I don't mind saying that.
But yeah, the rule book's thrown out here. I don't think you can go by history anymore. We all know that Kevin was always going to run an external campaign, if you like, and that he basically had to get the party to sort of suicide point almost. He had to get the lemming to the edge of the cliff and basically say, I'm the only one who can possibly save you from going over.
But isn't the thing, though, John Stanley, isn't the issue, though, is that even if there was a change to Kevin Rudd next week, half of the party... that's the Julia Gillard half will do to him what he did to her. Ultimately, as long as we have the numbers the way they are and with 2 factions as aggro as they are, it doesn't really matter who's in charge. The same thing's going to happen.
Well, they won't do it to him after next week because it's all going to come in the next few days. All the bile and all the anger that's been bottled up since that hung parliament emerged, which allowed all the resentment of Kevin Rudd, which has been building up. We've never heard Wayne Swan talk about what he really thinks of Kevin Rudd. We have tonight. We've heard it from Tony Burke. We're going to hear it, and someone just rang me and said there's going to be a pile of this dirt emerging over the next few days about what they really think of Kevin Rudd and the way he ran his government, and a lot of them will deal themselves out of being in a Rudd government.
Well, let's get into Wayne Swan's statement here. Richo said on the air and off, he has never seen something as full on as that in all of his career of looking at these things. If we've got the chance to put these up here, this is Wayne Swan having one heck of a whack. The party has given Kevin Rudd all the opportunities in the world, and he wasted them with his dysfunctional decision-making. He goes on to whack him about the 2010 campaign and his deeply demeaning attitude towards colleagues. He then goes on to say that he single-handedly tried to tear down the 2010 campaign. Mark, you've read this a couple of times. What do you think of the current Deputy Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd's Treasurer, saying that about the bloke that he used to say was, well, the adequate Prime Minister for the country?
Well, David Spears was saying at last they're coming out to say what the real Kevin Rudd is like. Well, I wrote a book 6 years ago. My diary's been gathering dust on the shelves. Sold a few copies in 2005, but not many since. It's all there for people to see. We've known what Rudd was like from year dot when he first came into the caucus. So these things, colleagues are sick of Kevin Rudd driving the vote down by sabotaging policy announcements and undermining our substantial economic successes. Well, Swanee, welcome to the club. Welcome to the club in saying the things that myself and others have been saying for the last 6 years about this bloke.
But wasn't that a function of the hung parliament, with his vote being crucial and staying in the ministry, that they couldn't say what they really thought about Kevin Rudd?
No, it was a function of the last election campaign.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
As Swan points out, Rudd sought to tear down the 2010 campaign. That's the news that was broken on the Paul Murray show, that Rudd was the leaker.
But no one in the Labor Party up till now has said that.
No.
And now they're all going to come out and say...
Couldn't have been true until Rudd resigned. But what happened was that...
Wayne Swan can now talk about dysfunctional decision-making that he was a party of. He was part of the Gang of Four. He was part of all that dysfunctional decision-making.
That'll make for a good column.
Correct.
But what happened in the 2010 election campaign, what happened was that to stop the leaking, John Faulkner got to Rudd and said, well, look, we'll make you the Foreign Minister if we can crawl across the line in this election. So for Christ's sake, shut up, stop leaking to Laurie Oakes and Peter Harcher. And for 10 minutes Rudd did, and they crawled across the line and became the Foreign Minister. And the rest, as they say, is history.
But isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point that you did write that book 6 years ago? We knew that among parts of the Labor Party, large parts of the Labor Party, Kevin Rudd was seen as a Machiavellian, sociopathic, stop-at-nothing, ruthless person who'd do anything to pursue his own ends at the cost of the party. And yet, still, they made him leader, which is fine, and he was doing very well for a while, most popular in history for a while. And then they think that this guy, who they're painted to be the most evil machine since Arnold Schwarzenegger played Terminator, they think they're just going to knife him and he's just going to ride off quietly into the sunset. I mean, is this what the smart... assuming all that is correct, and I'm not saying it's not, but... I think Kevin Rudd, in many respects, was a very good Prime Minister. But assuming that everyone knew this about him, and that's why they got rid of him, did they not stop to think that there might be a bit of a splashback from this?
Yeah, correct.
That he might actually turn around and go
biggest strategic
nuclear?
error since the guns of Singapore, that they could get rid of Rudd and not think he'd be seeking revenge.
And isn't it fair enough?
Big
if
mistake.
I was a first-term Prime Minister knifed in the back, I wouldn't know anyone any favours. I'd be feeling a bit disloyal to the
especially
party
Kevin
as well.
Rudd. It was obvious that Rudd would always go berserk. But now they've got the same scenario, because to bring him back would be an act of catastrophe, because it would fail to predict the obvious, which is that the government would be totally dysfunctional, stabbing back and destabilising back at Rudd, and this Swans statement is just a taste of what it would be like under a Rudd Prime
You'd
Minister.
have to presume he'd had a road to Damascus, though. I mean, if being knifed as PM doesn't teach you something, then...
Yeah.
We're talking about Kevin Rudd here.
All right, if you want to have...
He doesn't think he's on the
your
road to Damascus, he thinks he's up top.
If you want to have your
Writing
say
that
this evening, feel free, the hashtag PM Live. But also, if you have a question for anyone on the panel, and I'm assuming many of them will go to Mark, all you have to do is hit me up directly on Twitter. That is at PM on Air. Chris Kenny, again at The Australian. Mark, hold your fire. Let's get through the first minute of this. Is that, clearly there is a couple of audiences that play here. How you come to the leadership helps to really define how the public sees you. We have an election that, best case scenario for Labor, is 18 months away. If Kevin Rudd gets there through one challenge or two, through all of the destabilising, through all of the things that have happened in the past 12 months, does it not solidify what was already going to happen under Julia Gillard in 18 months' time? How exactly is Kevin Rudd a better option at an election than Julia Gillard, given how wounded he is to this point, coming to this moment where we're talking about this tonight?
Well, Kevin Rudd, of course, is self-possessed enough to believe that he can pull it out of the fire and win the election. I think he's dreaming. That's what's going on here. Is they're fighting, as I wrote earlier in the week. You got two people fighting over the steering wheel of Thelma and Louisa's car as it goes over the cliff. The Labor Party, the Labor government, is mortally wounded. They cannot recover from this. In fact, the sorts of bile we're seeing expressed now from Wayne Swan and here from Mark Latham is only going to deepen the mess that they're in. So it is a bit pointless. But of course, Kevin Rudd, he thinks he can save it. And it's about redemption for him. It's about vindication. He feels that he was done in the wrong way initially, and the best he can do for his own sort of ego and his own place in history is get the job back. And as I said before, I think one of the things that will focus the mind of caucus, and of course Kevin Rudd's coming from behind at the moment, but the two ways that he's going to try and build those numbers among the nervous Nellies in the caucus is that they know if they go to him, hopefully, that the leadership issue is settled until the election. They won't have another challenge 3 or 4 months down the track. And secondly, this popular support that will be expressed through many outlets, talkback radio and the like, but most importantly through opinion polls over the next week, which will show that Kevin Rudd is a more popular leader with the public. The polls will test him as leader against Tony Abbott as opposition leader, and that polling, we all know, will be very good for Kevin Rudd. And this is the sort of public external pressure, the public campaign that Kevin Rudd will be relying on to try and swing the votes of those waverers within caucus. And it is his best hope. Mark, it is the best hope, the best strategy for Kevin Rudd, because there's no way known he'd be able to sit down one-on-one and convince these people to vote for him or get the power brokers to swing blocks behind him. It just wouldn't happen.
Well, I think we're agreed on one thing, and that is that he hasn't got the support. And if his vote is closer to 30 than 40, there won't be a ballot next week. It would be an act of kamikaze to go in and expose himself after such a long, long process of destabilisation. To expose his lack of support within the caucus would be tragic for Rudd.
How would he look if he didn't, though? He's going to look a bit silly if he doesn't bring it to a head on Tuesday also.
Well, maybe, but Rudd's a master of finding alibis for why he's not running. I mean, you could have said that in 2003 when he paraded around, stayed in the ballot until the very last day. You could have said that in 2005. You see, the thing that Rudd does very, very effectively is to con the media into running his lines, his spin, his rumours, his gossip, his destabilisation day after day after day. And one of the things we'll be doing at the end of this process is to see what people wrote and where it came from. And a lot of the press gallery will be looking pretty skinny on that front because you've swallowed a lot of garbage from Rudd over the years, you and your colleagues, Chris, and it does you no credit, and it does the process no credit.
I don't talk to Kevin Rudd, but I mean, I think there's been a certain inevitability about his attempt to reclaim the leadership. So and the worse that Julia Gillard has gone, the better it's looked for Rudd. And you're forgetting, of course, that one of the big factors with the public is the public elected him in 2007, and they felt, whether they liked him or not, they felt that they were robbed of the chance to cast a verdict on him in the 2010 election. So that's a large part of the reason the public want him back is because they put him there in the first place.
Well, Rudd will say, if he doesn't run, Rudd will say three things. He'll say it's not the time, the party's been through too much, and Anna Bligh's interests facing an election in Queensland, his home state, must be paramount. So that's probably a fig leaf to get him through. There'll be embarrassment, of course, but it's a big enough fig leaf. And he's got cheerleaders in the media. Peter Harcher will write it up as a glorious statesman-like moment as Rudd pulled out. So we all know what happens in these circumstances, and it unfortunately will happen again.
All right, can you know what you think at any time? Hashtag SPM Live. I should point out that in the modern day you can issue press releases from, well, literally Twitter, and Kevin Rudd has actually tweeted in the past couple of moments. He says, thanks to everyone in the Twitterverse for your kind words, much appreciated.
Is that for me?
It's directly for you.
Or is that for Swanee?
Yeah, it is. I quickly want to jump into the Prime Minister's statement tonight. Clearly she's decided that Wayne Swans the one who's going to do the kicking here. The Prime Minister's statement was fairly brief. She congratulates him for being a great and effective advocate for Australia's interests overseas. This seems like the padding that you write in one of those things before you get to, and they will. We've now been sacked and will now go travelling. During his period as Foreign Minister, there were many achievements. He strongly pursued Australia's interests around the world. I am disappointed that the concerns Mr Rudd has publicly expressed this evening was never personally raised with me, nor did he contact me to discuss his resignation prior to his decision. She'll hold a press conference tomorrow. Now, Joe, no great surprise that these two don't quite talk to each other.
That's right, yeah, I thought they were close.
But I think that there is a certain weakness, and I know that Richo said a couple of hours ago, look, she doesn't have to do anything tonight, be word perfect and come out tomorrow. I think she has to do better when you're the Prime Minister, you're the person who the majority of the caucus will say is the person to kill off this challenge. She should have stepped in front of a microphone this evening.
Yeah, look, normally I would say that everyone should stand in front of a microphone at all times and just keep saying stupid stuff. But no, I don't. I'm with Richo on that one. I think it's far more important what she says now than how she says it. She's obviously going to have, Bill Shorten and Mark Abib and Dave Feeney all over the phones tonight just to find out how rock solid her numbers are.
Well, she'll be on the phones. If Gillard's smart, and she is in this, she'll have a list of 7 or 8 waivers.
Yeah.
And instead of talking to the press gallery, she'll be talking to them. She'll be on the phone to them right now, locking in their support. She's got a big strategic advantage. She's in the country. She's in Canberra, or she's in Adelaide. Yeah. She's in the country. Rudd's on a plane flying back from the other side of the world. She'll be on the phone to get to those 7 or 8 waivers, lock them in, and if you can get their votes early, hopefully she can hang on to them.
Well, and she'll have them, but I just don't...
Much more important than having a press conference.
I don't think we all agree that Rudd doesn't have the numbers in the caucus, but I think, again, there seems to be a sort of misreading of Rudd's character here. I mean, you can't... Again, I can only say Rudd is a different kind of politician, maybe better, maybe worse, probably both. But if history is a guide, it shows that Rudd runs when he doesn't have the numbers. He runs when he knows that he's going to lose. And if he loses, he almost doesn't care. It almost makes it better because he's proven once again that caucus have screwed over the most popular man in Australia just to pursue their own sort of narcissistic ends.
So, John.
There's something to that, and interestingly, the people he's got out tonight, I agree, I don't think she needs to come out tonight, but she's got Wayne Swan with his statement. You've got Tony Burke, who was on here earlier tonight, and I was watching Tony Burke, and Tony Burke's running what I'm sure is going to be the line, which is that we haven't been able to get clear air, that we've been undermined constantly by Kevin Rudd. And I was watching that and thinking, well, in fact, after the election, and Kevin Rudd destabilised the election, but the polls remained pretty well locked for months afterwards. And so it wasn't her powerless position in the polls has happened as a result of the carbon tax, the stuff up at the ALP conference, the Australia Day fiasco. All those things had nothing to do with Kevin Rudd. They're Julia Gillard own goals.
Absolutely.
Nothing to do with Kevin Rudd at all.
Yeah. Joe's raised a great point. That's the fourth reason Rudd will give for not running. The party's run by the factions, the faceless men. They've got the numbers locked up. I'm the people's champion, but they won't give me a go, and he'll hint at the benefits and glory of martyrdom.
Now I noticed that David Spears is on set, working the phones very hard in Canberra. Hopefully, if David can hear me, I want to ask you a question, mate. We saw this evening that Tony Burke was out there beginning to put the case quite forcefully as to why the Prime Minister should be retained. We've seen the statement here from Wayne Swan. Knowing this game and knowing the people who are